of Russia intentionally firing at one of Ukraine's power stations. Now, what we don't know is if this was simple negligence or an intentional action using this power station as an act of war. When nuclear power stations were built, they were never built to withstand war. So you might be wondering, why is it that Japan, Britain, Switzerland, and the Czech Republic, they're all making a fast track to nuclear energy? Now, nuclear energy has been around for a long time. At this point in the US, it powers about 20% of our green supply of energy. But these countries are fast-tracking it, in part because of the war in Ukraine. When I think of nuclear, I go all the way back to 1945, when the first atomic bomb exploded in Hiroshima. It was a tragedy, but there's also a sense of the awe of the atomic power, and that's part of the reason that just a year after Hiroshima, the United States created the Atomic Energy Act. They decided that instead of using the awesome energy of an atomic nucleus to bomb other countries, they would bring it home and use it to power their own country, which is really a great idea. So during the nuclear arms race, there was also a nuclear power race between the United States and Russia. And just 11 years after that bomb was dropped, both Russia and the United States had nuclear energy connected to their power grid. It was considered the way of the future. Once the system was set up, it ran clean, very low emissions. It was really inexpensive. Nuclear reactors were being built across the United States, but that didn't last very long. In less than 10 years, partial meltdowns started happening all across the country. There, Idaho, California, Michigan. And this really alarmed the public. There was concern about how effective these nuclear power plants would be. So that concern was only greatened in the 1980s with Chernobyl. This could be a big part of the reason that there was such a greater investment in the 1980s in both wind and solar. And they're both very low emission, and they're renewable. But there's still a problem. Wind energy is only available when wind is present. If you go to the desert, you're going to be good with sun. But forested areas, maybe not so much. Now, hydropower's a little bit better because you can control it. You can collect all of the rainwater in the wintertime and then release it as you need the energy. But even hydro has been a problem lately because with heavy droughts throughout the world, there are many hydropower stations that now are under the threat of not being able to function. There are reservoirs that are drying up, threatening huge swaths of area to be without power unless they drastically reduce their water consumption. And even if they do, depending on what the future holds, those hydropower plants may be shutting down. This is where I ask you to go ahead and hit like or subscribe. I'm new here on the platform, so my videos are only going to get better. Back to the war in Ukraine. After Russia declared war in Ukraine on the 24th of February, tough sanctions were put on Russia with the intent of isolating them from much of the world. Now, as a globalized world, that is one of the most punishing things you can do, is to isolate a country. And that is exactly what has been done, targeting their most sensitive sector, their energy sector. That is where Russia has their greatest exports. That's where they get the funds. And if they don't have the funds, it's hard to continue the war. So that was a theory that is beginning to bear fruit. This is definitely hurting Russia. The rest of the world is not immune. Gas prices have been soaring. Now, even in the U.S., we've been feeling it with higher prices at the pump, and consumer goods have also been increasing. But in places like Europe, that relied so heavily on Russian oil and natural gas, they are struggling to keep up. And with temperatures cooling right now, how they're going to have enough energy to warm their homes is actually a real concern. This is a big part of the reason why there's so many countries now looking to nuclear. As a matter of fact, France, dishonorable mention here, they are actually still buying uranium from Russia, which it's not part of the sanctions, but it just seems to be outside of the spirit of the sanctions. It's got to be a little hard for them because temperatures are cooling, winter is coming on. They need to heat their homes. And this is the reason it's not only climate change, needing a clean source of energy, but now we've realized how volatile the petroleum market and the natural gas market can be when so much of our worldwide supply is dependent on a country such as Russia. So, what is the U.S. doing about it? Well, interestingly enough, you don't really hear this talked about very much, but just 11 days before Russia declared war, the U.S. Department of Energy invested $6 billion into ensuring that nuclear reactors were able to continue working. Did this have anything to do with the war in Ukraine? It's really hard to tell. It bears mentioning that just 2 days before the war was declared, the EU did similar things. Now, this just could be a timing coincidence, but the US knew that Russia was going to invade. The EU knew that Russia was going to invade. And so, with the volatility that was likely to ensue on the energy market, they planned ahead. And with times like these, this is no longer about planning for the future. Climate change is happening right now. You made it to the end. So I have a question for you. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? I have only been making these videos for a short period of time, but I am going to continue, and sometimes I get curious who's out there watching me. So can you give me a clue? And to be fair, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I think we all have our different identities, and I identify most strongly with that of mother. And my main concerns at this point in my life are to raise my son to be a good person, and the concern of what type of a world are we leaving to him and his generation. Now your turn.